So Game of Thrones is now finally and permanently over. How was the finale in my opinion? Well, we have known for quite some time now, the Game of Thrones that we see is not the one we fell in love with so many years ago. So this finale was appropriate for the current version of Game of Thrones, but definitely not fitting to nor fulfilling the Game of Thrones legacy. Hello, namaskar, welcome, swagatam. You are with the versatile doctor at the end of an era. No more Game of Thrones. In this edition of our weekly Game of Thrones discussion, we will talk a little bit about the 6th episode of Season 8 of Game of Thrones, the series finale. I'll keep this discussion short and relatively spoiler free. We'll talk in depth later. As it stands, I did not dislike this episode, but truth be told, it was underwhelming and definitely not what Game of Thrones is for true fans. Now that the Night King is dead, there is no more winter. I thought summer and winter, however long, were natural order of things in Westeros and not the mood swings of the Night King. We were told stories about decades long winter. Now we are to believe that all that was just because of the Night King. If that was the case, how did humanity survive? Few years of autumn and a few months of winter in the wake of Night King led to the Great War, killing hundreds of thousands of people from the Great North to Winterfell. So I'm not buying that all the previous winters were just rise of Night King and his subsequent fall. Anyway, today's episode started with Tyrion searching for his brother and sister in the decimated Red Keep, and he finds them. Beyond the fallen towers, the broken walls and cracked floors, in the middle of all that wreckage and rubble, he was able to find exactly where Jaime and Cersei had their final moments. But that is hardly the main complaint with this episode. Daenerys Targaryen gives an emperor-like speech and her followers cheer. But she did not burn Tyrion as she was expected to do, as Tyrion had betrayed her once again by freeing Jaime. At that moment, it was clear as the clear blue sky that Tyrion was not going to die at all and that the days of Daenerys Targaryen were numbered. Remember the climax from X-Men The Last Stand? So Dany doesn't get to sit on the Iron Throne, nor does anyone else. Then there is the convenience of Drogon's sudden departure. There is so much in the 8th season of Game of Thrones that doesn't make sense. A new kind of democracy has taken hold of Westeros, but no one is talking about the massacre of King's Landing. It is mentioned only a few times that Daenerys had murdered innocent women and children, where it could have been a major point of conflict between Daenerys and Jon. After a city has been decimated by a dragon, can it rise back again on its feet so soon? From the beards of Tyrion and Jon, it appears that only few weeks have passed since King's Landing's fall before the Westerosi ladies and lords conferred together to choose their new king or queen. But what happened to the Unsullied and the Dothraki in the meanwhile? The Unsullied are definitely obedient and disciplined, but the Dothraki would never settle down in a burnt King's Landing and start families and normal life. There is so much that this season finale doesn't close properly that it becomes a cheap gag. Perhaps they knew it, which is why they made the second half of this episode a light comedy. I'll not talk more about today's episode in this video. Our weekly discussion will continue and will delve deeper and deeper in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones. By next week, most of you would have caught up on the 8th season. We'll talk about what made Game of Thrones rise to such heights of success and fandom and where it all went wrong. My only hope is that George R.R. Martin releases his next book this year or early next year. Otherwise, the GOT madness would have subsided, and I think most of the people would lose interest in George R.R. Martin's vision for this saga. See, recently George R.R. Martin was quoted as saying, "The series has been not completely faithful, otherwise it would have run for another 5 seasons.
But it's not completely faithful, and it can't be. Otherwise, it would have to run another 5 seasons.
Well, to that I say, it is your fault, Mr. Martin. It has been over 8 years since the last book in A Song of Ice and Fire was published. If you had finished the books in the timeline that you yourself had set, the showrunners of Game of Thrones would have had something to be faithful to. What do you think? Have you read all the published 5 books in A Song of Ice and Fire? And what did you think about the season finale? Do let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you have been following me on our weekly discussion on Game of Thrones, please do invite your other friends to join too. And subscribe to my channel for more versatile content. Until the next week's discussion, this is Dr. Abhinav Atul signing off. It is my pride and privilege to be able to connect with you through this video. Namaskar.